So it makes food authenticity method chart. That is my personal method chart, of course. And I like to go with the saying, horses for courses. It's a famous British phrase, and it means the right tool for the right matrix or the right analyte. There's usually not just one tool. If you want to detect something, there are usually several tools. Some are more expensive, some are less expensive. Some require educated staff, some don't. So I think it's always worth evaluating your option, what might be the right method for that. So I'll give you an example. We have the case of oregano and the adulteration of oregano with olive and sumac leaves. So now you could go for a PCR, that is a polymerase chain reaction, a DNA-based method. And you have to have the primer specific to the adulterant. So you have to have primers that are specific for olive, and you have to have primers that are specific for sumac leaves. If there is another adulterant, another leaf, another herb maybe in there that is adulterating the oregano, and you don't have the primers, you won't see that. So PCR is a good tool when you know what you're looking for. But if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't be able to find it. And this is where next generation sequencing comes in. So here, any plant species, any animal species, bacteria, viruses, you get it all, except that it takes quite some time. It's quite expensive. And I think cost-benefit ratio, it's, unless you're really looking for something that is severe, it may not make much sense to use a whole genome sequencing on what you're looking for. Instead, what you could do, if you know that your adulterant is plant or animal based, you could use specific primers, that is some sort of like targeted next generation sequencing, where you identify any plant that is in there or any animal. So for example, cytochrome B or cytochrome oxidase, sorry, that was meant to be for meat species. But so here you could look at animal species, for example, where you use cytochrome B or cytochrome oxidase 1, and it's more expensive than the PCR, but it's less expensive than the NGS, and you get all the species. So you don't have to specifically know what you're looking for. You just have to know, am I looking for plant species or animal species? Or for plant species, you could use MAT-K, for example. So you have targets for plants and for animals, and next generation sequencing can give you an idea of which are the adulterants that you have. And then, who would have thought of that? You might even go for a very cheap method. Because if you have a guy that, or a person that is experienced in microscopy, he may be able to identify under a microscope for very little money the leaves from olive and from sumac. So this is why I say look very closely at the different options that you have in terms of analytical tools before making the decision. So if you have unlimited resources, you may go for next generation sequencing. If you know what you're looking for, you may go for PCR. And if you say, well, you know, most of that we know is plant-based, so we're looking for microscopy, that might get you way cheaper. So now, and here comes the next one, is the picture that was also kindly provided by Karen Everstein. This takes me to the non-targeted analysis, and explains a little bit why we need to have and need to look at non-targeted analysis. So this is, and so keep the date in mind, so that was a query from 2017. That was the USP Food Fraud Database, now Food Chain ID database. And when you look at the different adulterants, cow's milk, 128 adulterants. So how many methods do you need to run to identify all possible 128 adulterants? Cost-benefit analysis would say it doesn't make sense to use all methods. So you might as well use some alternatives, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Olive oil, 39 known adulterants, and the emphasis on known because obviously fraudsters, as Semi pointed out, don't want to be found out. So they may use something that we haven't discovered yet. So this is why the emphasis on known adulterant, orange juice, 38, 58 on chili powder, and 34 for beef. So we have methods for basically different types of adulteration. And for example, addition of cheap extenders, we can use UV visualize, fluorescent, infrared, mislabeling, stable isotope ratio analysis, trace elements, animal and plant species, as I alluded to earlier, PCR or next generation sequencing, admixtures, mass spectrometry or gas chromatography. So we have the tools, but when you look at all the possible adulterants, it's kind of difficult to test for all of them. So either you have to focus or you use the different types of methods. But let's look at the selected, frequently adulterated commodities. Let's start with milk. What do we see in milk? So common adulterants of milk are water, starch, vegetable fats, formaldehyde, the melamine that we've heard about, nitrogen-containing compounds, urea, melamine. And if you buy sheep or goat milk, you may have an adulteration by the cheaper bovine milk. What do we have in our toolbox to detect that? So addition of water, cryoscopy, addition of starch, iodine, vegetable fats, fatty acid profile analysis, formaldehyde, liquid chromatography, nitrogen-containing compounds, urea, melamine, we can use LC-MS-MS, addition of bovine milk, we can use PCR, and there are several other adulterants that we can detect using Fourier transformation, infrared or mid-infrared screening. Now for rice, I already mentioned the non-basmati and basmati rice. We have sometimes colorants that are used for fake black rice or paraffins for translucency. So for the basmati, non-basmati, you can use PCR or next generation sequencing. And as I pointed out, also NIR. For colorants, you can use LC-MS-MS. For paraffins, you can use HPLC. For the herbs and spices, azo dyes, fillers, sand, dirt or clay, bran, safflower, especially for saffron. So here, again, same toolbox, liquid chromatography coupled to mass spectrometry. For the filler, dirt and clay, we can use simple microscopy or even sieving. For saffron adulteration, for safflower adulteration in saffron, we can use PCR and microscopy. But let's do a quick detour. And I mentioned earlier that you are actually able to do food fraud detection at home in your kitchen. This is something that I thought was worthwhile showing. When you read DART, what are you thinking about? Well, being a scientist, the first thing that came to mind when I saw the word was direct analysis in real time, which is a mass spectrometry kind of test that uses ambient, where you can shoot basically material into the mass spec and then it's being analyzed. Now, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India actually has termed DART detect adulteration with rapid tests. So it means something completely different. And it's meant for consumers. It's meant to be done at home with the tools that you do have usually in your kitchen. And that I find very interesting, because that is something that's an approach that should be promoted, I feel, and should be propagated through different countries, because it's so simple, because they use things that everybody has in the kitchen, or most people do anyway. And they cover quite a range. So they cover milk and milk products, oils and fats, sugars, food grains, spices, and other materials. So let's just say you have black pepper adulterated with papaya seeds. If you put it in water, you can see that the black pepper sinks to the ground. The papaya seeds, because they're much, much lighter, they float in the water. So it's a very simple detection, just using a glass of water. Similarly, when you have colorants like azo dyes in spices, what you can do is basically you put the spices on top, carefully though, the spices on top of the water layer. And if there is color, you will see those clouds from the artificial color. If you have the spices that have not been adulterated, you won't see those colors basically forming clouds in the glass. Similarly, grass seed colored with charcoal in cumin seeds. And here, a very common one, dilution of milk with water. And this is what pure milk looks like. And if you have it adulterated or diluted rather with water, it looks very different. Again, you could do that at home. And unfortunately, especially in India, you find, not just India, but also other countries, you find that to kind of preserve milk, they put detergent in it, which is adverse to health. So it's not very, very good to have detergent in your milk. And again, it's similar. You just add water to it, and it will show different if you have adulterated milk. So this is the unadulterated milk, and this is what the adulterated milk look like when you have added water and the milk contains detergent. So a very simple test that everybody can do at home. So I thought it was a fantastic idea of the FSSAI to put such a booklet out and provide their citizen with tools that allows them at home to detect food fraud. Now we're coming to one of my favorite topics. It's honey. And honey has a very interesting history, because when you look at the sequence of events, especially the sequence of adulterations and the types of adulteration that you see there is an evolution, and the fraudsters tend to stay one step ahead of the game. So let's take a step back into the past and look what happened. And Sami mentioned AOAC, and one of the first AOAC approved method for honey was the delta 13 carbon element analyzer isotope ratio mass spectrometry for the identification of C4 sugars. So basically, honey was adulterated or stretched with corn sugar or sugarcane sugar. So those are C4 sugars. So then there was this method, delta 13 method. So now the adulteration with corn sugar could be detected. Voila, the fraudsters came up, adulterating the honey no longer with C4 sugars, but with C3 sugars, so for example, from wheat or rice starch. So then the scientists developed a method to not only detect the C4 sugars, but also the C3 sugars. Then all of a sudden, when the C3 and the C4 sugars could be detected, the fraudsters came up with purified or refined syrups that were not detectable with that method. So then the scientists developed specific enzymatic marker tests to uncover that. And then you had the introduction of additional specific markers for rice sugar and color. And then there was an NMR profiling. So now we have an additional adulterant, that's specifically mannose and psychose, in highly refined syrups. And we have tailored syrups. And if you go to some of the platforms, the online trading platforms, the likes of Alibaba, you find that people sell sugar syrups, and they even give you the types of tests they will pass. So for example, you find a product, this syrup will pass this delta C13 test or the NMR test. And so you know it's already, basically you can buy something regularly online in an online trading shop to adulterate the honey in large quantities. So I think it's basically a cat and mouse system here, where you always try to stay ahead of the games, but the fraudsters are the ones that tend to invent new methods and tend to invent something that we haven't been testing for. And this is why we need non-targeted methods. And here I'm showing you the slide from 2017, again, that you saw before, that was kindly provided by Karen. And now this is the updated slide from 2020 from Food Chain ID. And when you go back just one more time, you can see milk here has 128 known adulterants. And now, a couple of years later, we know of 163. So there are probably many, many more out there that we haven't discovered. So this is where the non-targeted analysis comes in. And what does it do different? The targeted analysis looks for the compounds you know of, so urea, melamine, azodice, and so on. But if the fraudsters come up with a new trick, with a new adulterant that you haven't been looking for, you're unlikely to find it. So this is where the profile screening comes in. And this is called non-targeted analysis, because what you're looking for here is not an individual adulterant. What you're looking for is the overall profile of a commodity, so say honey. And if there is a significant change against a reference profile. So for this, you need reference material. So let's say you're having Manuka honey from Australia, New Zealand, then you would need a reference database with Manuka honey, and that needs to encompass different years, different seasons, when the honey, when the bees produce the honey, from different beehives, of course. So you need to have that reference database. Then you need to have a system that calculates the overall profile, and there will be an upper and a lower limit, as you can see here. And if your sample falls within that limit, that's the solid blue line, it's less likely to be adulterated. But if it's outside, there is a good chance, like here, that peak that you see, there's a good chance that there's something in there that does not match the normal Manuka honey. Of course, you always have the chance that that might be a seasonal variability, but if it is, you add that to the profile, adjust the profile accordingly, and next time it will stay in. But if it's really an adulterant, you have discovered a new adulterant. And this is why there is a need for non-targeted analysis, because there's no other method available right now that allows you to detect across the board changes to a product. And AOAC has actually formed a food fraud task force. And we have three, one for targeted testing, one for DNA, and I'm just mentioning the non-targeted testing that is led by John Spilker. And basically the concept here was to create a standardized fingerprint for an ingredient, to compare the new lots to the of ingredient to the fingerprint. So that's a profile that I explained to you. And then you have a chemometric examination to reveal if the differences are outside of the normal variability. So if we just go back, so the light blue area here is your normal variability. Oops, sorry. And if something is outside, then you would start investigating if that is food fraud. So for that, we have, for example, a baseline for honey. There is an SMPR, standard method performance requirements for honey, for non-targeted method. And here we define the specific parameters and also the number of samples to be tested to develop a non-targeted method for honey. And this brings me full circle, because here we're moving again to the portable devices, which most of them, if not all, are non-targeted. NIR in this case is a non-targeted method, and the multi-sensor from for detection of adulteration of extra virgin olive oil is also non-targeted. So again, here we need reference sets of data, but it will allow us to discover adulterants that we may not know are present. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention and hand back to Nurul.